Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. It is exactly 11:53 a.m. You are tuned in to the mid-morning talk show with me, Julie Ali, and we're now going to be touching on a very, very important aspect within our community. And I've often raised this question, and I keep asking whenever I hear about marriages breaking down or there's problems in a marriage. And when I hear about young people having fights about, you know, when and how often they should be visiting parents and parents-in-law, when and how often should they be having meals at one set, with one set of family as opposed to the other, when and how certain girls or guys put down their foot and say, I refuse to visit your parents at all because. And that's just one of the issues that come up in new marriages. Not to say it doesn't happen in older marriages. When I say older marriages, people married 10, 20, 30 years and beyond. But these are the little things. From the outside, it may seem as very petty, but yet can actually build up over time, and the resentment runs so deep that eventually it can end up in a breakdown of the marriage. This also, presents these type of issues presents during Ramadan, during the Eid festivities, visiting certain members of the family, visiting, and all of that and so much more, which on the surface seems so very petty, but like I said, over time builds up very, very deep resentments. So we're going to talk with Moulana Mohammed Bham, who is the head of Department of the Social Development of Jusa at Jamiat, of course, which works hand in hand with Islamic Care Line. Moulana Mohammed Bham is a male counselor and also does mediation. And he has been doing this for over 13 years. So that, I must say, is very, very comforting to know that we do have male counselors that are involved in this type of work. So let's get to the heart of the matter. Assalamu alaikum to you, Moulana. Shukran very much for joining us on this very important matter in our community, very especially since we're hearing of so very many marriages that are breaking down and girls going back home to their parents or setting up home on their own and becoming single parents. So this is a huge divide within our community, and I think we need to get to the core of the problem and start addressing it before it festers into broken marriages. Welcome. We do
Walaikum
know.
salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. But to yourself and to all of the listeners. And Jazakallah khaira, and thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure, and I can't even begin to stress the importance of this discussion. So, Moulana, at its core, what is a Nikkah contract, and why is it often misunderstood as a purely religious formality rather than a binding agreement?
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think, when you started off with the introduction to this discussion, uh, sometimes we overlook the issues that somewhat begin to be petty and then can develop and really harm a relationship greatly. So when we speak about a marital contract, then we generally refer to the nikah itself. So the nikah has also been called in terms of our Sharia, mithaqan ghalidha, a type of contract between the parties. When they engage in a nikah, then there are many rules and rights and responsibilities that come about and become necessary for both husband and wife to fulfill. So generally the nikah itself is restricted mostly to Islamic rights and responsibilities. However, because we live in a context of a secular country, then we're finding more and more often that the secular system is also having certain a level of dakhal or inclusion within the nikah contract. So at some points it becomes maybe necessary that parties have a clear discussion about uh, maybe some of the major issues and the way our community may be going. It is also wise to have a further discussion. So I think what you touched on in the beginning is more discussions about the issues which relate to understanding between the couple. So when we speak about contracts, then we speak about maybe addressing certain things which are the core of relationships. And also then as an addendum to that or further discussions, especially the points that you have raised, is something that the couple should have discussions about, and this should be done premarital discussions, understandings, or at least when the couple get married, then very soon they have this type of communication which will then flow between the husband and wife.
So, Moulana, I think that we have reached a point in our community where we are seeing way too many divorces. And oftentimes, like in my introduction, it's petty little issues that over time then culminate into such deep resentment that relationships are either broken down completely, or either the wife or the husband or other family members are totally marginalized from the family structure simply because the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law can't get along with someone within that family, or there was some broken trust issues, despite the fact that the person who mends their ways, asks for maaf, and tries to move on, you still find people holding on to old wounds and bear lots of grudges and cause such a breakdown in that family that if the marriage itself doesn't break down, then there isn't really a relationship with the married couple and their children, with the parents in law, with either one set of the parents in law, which is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. And we
Mhm.
know that these scenarios are actually very real and playing out in our communities. Should we not be talking very seriously about a nikah should not be performed unless the couple, together with their families, have gone for premarital counseling and contracts to that effect have been signed?
Okay, so you've raised a very important issue, as I've mentioned. But when it comes to contracts, then normally in terms of Shariat, what we are taught in terms of our Deen, what we are taught is that there is a level of understanding of the family that we do, and we try and find spouses who are compatible to us in certain ways. So when that compatibility is found, then at the core of entering into a relationship, you have communication issues. You have effective communication that is vital, that every couple have this type of communication issues and effective communication between them. And in terms of addressing these type of issues, in terms of how the family should work, etc., these are mostly discussions that need to happen between the husband and wife. So when we look at marital counseling and premarital discussions or contracts, then in terms of the strictly contractual part, uh, contracts are something which are not open to a lot of interpretation. That is why if we add certain things into a contract, then those things are very specific, speaking with regard to mahar, how the marriage maybe should be dissolved in certain cases, issues where generally we have many masail or many questions that come to us with regard to status of certain gifts, etc. just touching on certain points which are included in a short type of marital contract. But however, human nature and human beings are very complex and complicated. So that is why, certain things would be delegated uh, to more of a premarital conversation, or as the marriage develops, we don't take away the skills of parties or husband and wife to be able to discuss issues. And then, if there are certain issues with regard to the family, my point is that sometimes these things are difficult to include within a marital contract. That what is the type of contact or the type of association we will have with your family, to write that down. It is more of a communication issue between the husband and wife. And yes, what you've raised in terms of having these premarital conversations, in terms of Sharia, we try and have this compatibility, and there are discussions that happen between the families as well. But a lot of the discussions, and your spouse, you start developing, and the most important and crux of your relationship, as also spoken by the psychologist, is within the first 3 years of your relationship. So that
Mm.
is where you discuss these issues. And if there is an issue that is coming about and it's going to start and become a big issue later on, then we try and have that counseling, which the parties go into and saying that we're having these type of issues before it becomes worse. Let us try and have these type of discussions, so that later on it does not culminate to a stage where the marriage is now going to be damaged. So that is very important. And in terms of the level of these discussions, there is a balance in terms of Sharia as well, in that marriage is something that is important. If, for example, discussions will take place to such a degree wherein now it will delay the marriage, then uh, that is something that we have to have a balanced view with regard to that. That if you find somebody in terms of Sharia which is a suitable spouse for you in terms of Deen, in terms of Islam, then there shouldn't be unnecessary delay. However, important discussions cannot be left out. Important discussions. So just to give you an example, like for example, the Jamiat have uh, a template of a certain contract, and to make the point of a differentiation between what can go into a contract and what are points of discussion between the couple. We've separated the two into, say, one is a contract, which obviously the things are not open to too much of interpretation, and there's a memorandum of understanding between the couple. So those type of things are those discussions which happen between the families, to say that this is how we will run our relationship. But in terms of the contract, it's a bit more precise in terms of speaking about aspect of mahar, even though the marriage is starting, but certain things, serious aspects with regard to talaq, etc., how it should take place. Because some of these things are intrinsic within a marital nikah. Mithaqan ghalidha. When you are making the nikah at the masjid and you're saying nakahtuha, I've accepted this marriage, and you have already accepted all of those consequences and rights and responsibilities that are attached to a nikah. So sometimes in our contract also, in the template, we are actually just stating out clearly that this is what you obliged to be doing in terms of deen itself. And obviously, in terms of the legal framework, that this is what Islam says with regard to, for example, your property regime, who provides in terms of the household. So those things are mentioned in the contract, which is a bit more brief. And then there is memorandum of understanding or discussions that the couples would have in terms of how they would govern their relationship. And a lot of those things will come about, sometimes before, between the families, if there's something that is very important to them. However, even between the couple, they will have these discussions, because at the core of a relationship is the husband and wife, and all other what they call would be, what they speak about, horizontal and vertical stresses, right? So the family, extended family, as important as they may be in terms of deen as well, they are the third party within the relationship, and the husband and wife need to have discussions about how they will manage those type of relationship and all other issues that will affect them as they move along in their relationship.
So, Alhamdulillah, I'm glad to hear that the Jamia does have a template of a contract and an MOU. Has this now become standard practice? When do you actually give it to the couple? Would it be on together with their Nikkah certificate, or is this only on a needs basis or a request basis?
So it's mostly on, because remember the nikah itself is a certain contract between the parties, and whatever in deen we are taught, whatever a person engages in, he or she should have knowledge with regard to that. As Umar radiallahu ta'ala, for example, when anyone would want to trade, he would make sure that you know the rulings with regard to how to trade before entering. So similarly, as a person gets married, he or she needs to know his rights and responsibilities with regard to that nikah. So that is what is encouraged, and sometimes at the masjid that is discussed. So on a needs basis, if parties request that we would like to have, a session, we sometimes try to encourage certain imams to have a discussion with the families before, because as much as these things may have been previously maybe known, or something that wasn't discussed because there was an understanding, as we're moving along and from experience, we're finding that simple issues sometimes, which parties ought to know, are neglected. So there is that type of encouragement. However, it is something that is by optional, that the parties need to engage, approach an alim, approach an organization, say we would like to have a sitting with an alim, we would like to understand the rulings, we would like to maybe understand what does a marriage contract generally involve, what else can we add on it, should it form part of a MOU or discussion between the parties, legally what are the consequences of our marriage, because this is also a big point of discussion now, that when there is this intervention of the secular system in terms of our personal law, then how do we navigate that? Our seniors would say that as much as we want to follow in terms of our personal matters, our deen, but now obviously when there is an avenue that, look, you can approach a secular court and maybe you can get something to your advantage, then we are tempted. So how to maybe quell that, approaching a secular court, etc., is also part of the discussions. That maybe you should have a contract which is not only in terms of Sharia legally binding to some degree, but also something which is enforced in terms of the legal system. These are some of the discussions that we would have with spouses. That if your nikah is merely a nikah contract, then there is a chance that for some reason maybe bitterness comes about later on, that the other spouse now, notwithstanding the fact that Sharia has its way in terms of how it should be terminated, how the party should go ahead in terms of discussing the issues when there is difficulty, they may approach a court, and in that case you may be in a difficult situation. So all of these type of aspects, sometimes young people are not averse. They're not aware with regard to this. Rather, they're not aware with regard to the consequences of these things when they enter marriage. And I don't think it's something that we have also, in the community at large, that we have done enough in terms of creating these forums or encouraging parties to have this knowledge and have these discussions prior to marriage. So we do have this contract. However, coming back to your question, it is something optional. If parties come to us and it seems like there is an increase, there is more people asking with regard to it. However, there's still a lot left open, and a lot that can be done in terms of getting uh, couple, each young couple, to have these discussions with ulama to understand what are the consequences, what are my rights and responsibilities, what type of discussions should I engage in with my spouse very early in the relationship.
Very sadly, it seems that all of our energy and focus um, is really on the wedding, the wedding preparation, not the nikah, not the contract, not the MOU, but how many guests are to be invited and all the decor and fancy venues, wedding gowns, and all of that, which is so sad because. You kind of think that that type of thinking, which is a very Western concept, not that I'm necessarily totally averse to it, but in the process of keeping up with the Joneses, we are sacrificing family ties because we want a talk of the town wedding, and we want everyone to praise us for the fabulous function or functions that we hosted leading up to the marriage of our child or our children. And there's so much of focus placed on that, that the key issues and elements regarding what you and I have just touched on, the Nikkah, the contract, the MOU, perhaps families, the two sets of parents coming together and saying what their part will be in the lives of their children, should any form of difficulties arrive, because there's a lot of pressure on young people these days. We have issues around expectations of the type of homes the girls want these days, how much, what the guys earning. Our girls today are also very, very independent, so they, in their own rights, being financially secure, would also perhaps, um, you know, try to override decisions probably made by the groom or on advice from his father or his side of the family, which won't necessarily sit well with the girl in her family. So I've raised a couple of issues here. I'm talking about lavish weddings and lavish celebrations and the build up to all of that. Some key elements are overlooked or forgotten completely. Your thoughts,
Mm,
Moulana?
mm, yeah. Yeah, so as they say, sometimes we prepare for the wedding as opposed to preparing for the marriage itself. So that's a reality,
Abs-
um, which we need to be changing. That the wedding is a day, the functions could be a few days, but then the marriage lasts forever, and way past the wedding reception. Sometimes you have a situation that sometimes the type of functions that take place over a week or two, those last more than the actual marriage. So that's a huge problem
mm,
in terms of what you've raised. I did mention with regard to maybe you just give me a few moments just to touch on when we speak about the contract and just to make the differentiation between some of the aspects which are discussed. I think you raised something with regard to also how what role do the parents have when there is some type of disagreements. So as I mentioned, sometimes we have a more of a discussion and personality based understanding your spouse and certain things which generally come into a contract. So I just want to outline certain things which are generally discussed in a contract type of way, in that it forms part of that nikah, and it's signed between the parties, um, because those are the principal issues within the relationship. And I'm just going to go over from our template just to read the headings so that an understanding, we gain an understanding with regard to the type of
sure.
issues
Please
which
go ahead.
generally can be discussed at that forum
Mm,
and are the
sure.
core of a marital contract. So normally we speak about, for example, the mahar, because there is something which is a pillar of the nikah. There's an exchange that takes place. And then we have so firstly, we discuss what is, the terms, what is mahar, what is nikah, what is talaq, what is iddah. Then we have the first thing is mahar, because that is a core and a pillar. Then we have the property regime, who owns what. This forms more of a principal discussion within, a marital contract, or contract between the parties. And then
And
what you
so
brought about in
important
terms of,
and so very important.
mm, especially the legal consequences also that it has in today's time. And it's not
Right.
only that it works both ways, where you mentioned that women are very independent. Previously it would be that a wife would maybe approach a court and ask for something which in terms of sharia doesn't belong to her from a court. But it works the other way around in today's time. If a woman is very independent, the husband can approach a court and say, look, I would like to have certain percentage of the household. But that also leads to something about what we have in terms of independence. Leads us to the next point, which is a duty of support in terms of Islamically. What are we taught in terms of who provides mainly for the household, and some discussion around that. If there's independence from a wife, then what is the nature of that relationship that takes place? Uh, then we also have certain issues with regard to transparency prior to a marriage. So if there's some type of screening that is required, or so our Sharia also speaks about these type of things. There shouldn't be deceit in terms of when you go into a relationship. So our contract speaks about certain uh, transparency that is required, based on the parties. Then, we have with regard to when we have like property regime, we also have assets that people own, that couples would own. What is the nature of that? Later on, it becomes a big bone of contention, and who owns what, together with that gifts that are given, between the party. And I think what you raise now, the next point is conflict management. So when we
Hmm.
speak about parents and what their role is, this is something that can come under this, is that generally from experience we have that when if there's a neutral party, people who are known to be counselors, people who are they are neutral in the situation, they don't necessarily be emotionally involved. Most of the time when parents are involved, then it is as a support to their son or daughter. um, Even those we expect to have to be level, it's more like a human nature that you support your own child. So sometimes we would encourage that, try and have uh, conflict management or these type of discussion with somebody who doesn't have any um, link to either of the parties, so they can be a completely neutral view within that situation. Then in terms of how we go about if the matter escalates further, with regard to association with the children, some type of separation, that also becomes, can become extremely acrimonious. So the context speaks about not that we prepare, nobody gets married to divorce, but in the case that there is some type of arguments and, parties are speaking about separation for a while, what happens to children, then there's a process also to be followed. That parties speak. Sometimes from our experience, we find that people for a couple of years, they're unable to get any type of closure. But when they enter into a correct conflict management, mediation, within a day sometimes, just in the week, last week, not even a full day, within half an hour, where the parties were not speaking for years, they couldn't come to an agreement. When the person who is experienced and skilled and completely neutral sits the parties down, separates them where need be, puts and tells them this is what happens in situations, this is what is good for your kids, this is in the interest of all the parties. When that process is engaged, that process is used, then sometimes we have that, and that thing very quickly is resolved, even though it may be for a temporary separation or a complete separation. And then finally, what is important, in terms of us living in a secular state and not having an Islamic system, is that certain things which are non-negotiables, and comes about later on within a relationship, then what is the recourse for both the parties? Mostly it seems that interest is in terms of the wife, in terms of the clause of having a certain exit strategy, we could say. Because Islamically, the husband is responsible with regard to nikah and, terminating of the marriage, because he ought to be more emotionally strong. However, certain times, he may lack that emotional strength, and the wife may come into a situation where she's unable to continue within a relationship. So part of the contract considers those type of things, which would make it unbearable for a woman to then live within that relationship. But it's not blanket, as certain places, you have a blanket type of delegation of divorce that takes place to the wife side. So this is very structured in terms of to say that, only when certain conditions are found, when it becomes very difficult, would this clause then kick in. So this is basically the few things that are included in the contract. Now, all of the issues what Appa raised, maybe my point is that, those are points of discussion that form a memorandum of understanding between the couple, or an education to say that this is how we ought to conduct ourselves within a marriage.
Okay, Moulana, I'm unfortunately we're running out of time, but the contact, what you've just shared with me is so comprehensive. Alhamdulillah. I'm really pleased to hear that this is available to us as a community. Let me wrap up by then saying, and very quickly, so that's contained in the contract. But if there are further issues that the couples or the families want to raise, that can then be contained in the MOU. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, so sometimes we have a discussion, and that discussion would be, okay, what do you want to probably have an
Oh,
understanding regarding, with your spouse. So if those things are something which can come under an ambit of a contract, which means it can be actually stipulated, and it's not open to too much interpretation, and it forms part of these clauses, and it has happened previously, where people have included this in a contract, then we would say, okay, so based on the need basis and what is actually brought about. So, maybe taking the example of when, to visit and those type of things, I think won't be included in a contract itself. That could maybe form part of a memorandum of understanding or premarital discussions between the family. That look, we are a very
Right.
close knit family. We need to be
Okay.
meeting, once in a month, once in 2 weeks. Those type of things we can ask the other party. Look, are you in agreement with that? Should it be something that it should be written down? So those are
Okay.
on a need basis.
Jazakallah. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be rude. We have to wrap it
No
up there.
problem.
One final question. If every couple could walk into a nikah with one critical piece of knowledge or preparation, what should it be and why? Maulana?
Uh, Gee, I'm with you. There's a tough one because the contract contains so much of information. So
Okay.
to restrict it to one,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's because of our situation, instant type of gratification.
Oh,
I would say that it would be difficult to pinpoint one specific thing. Yes, we may leave a couple with some piece of advice that we would think is most uh, relative to their personal situation. So, based on our discussions which we have had with you and the family, this could be one important based on your situation. Otherwise, it would be that look, in terms of Islamically, we have been given and taught a lot of things with regard to nikah. There's no shortcuts. You can't
absolutely.
say that you have to learn at least the basics of everything within the Islamic framework. At least the basics of what your rights and responsibilities are. Then in terms of the one advice that would vary from couple to couple, nothing is really coming to mind right now.
Okay, no
Um,
worries. I think that we've covered a lot. All I can say is I'm really pleased to hear that the Jamiat does have a template of the contract, and you've clearly defined what the memorandum of understanding is all about. You also raised two very other important issues is conflict management and mediation, which I do know that Islamic Care Line does offer to couples. So Alhamdulillah for the amazing work you guys have put into family matters. I have to wrap up there. So thank you indeed for your input. Till the next time, as always, keep us in your du'as and salamu alaikum to you.
wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to yourself and to the listeners, and jazakallah again for having us on the program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.